Compound V. It created every superhero you've ever seen in the boys. Without Compound V, there is no Homelander, no Soldier Boy, no Starlight, no A-Train, no Vought. Everything that happens in this universe can be traced back to a single blue serum. Most fans think Compound V is just a drug that gives people powers. It isn't. It's the greatest act of human experimentation ever committed. It stole childhoods, created monsters, started an international arms race, and handed one corporation enough power to influence the entire world. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Compound V isn't the most incredible invention in the boys. It's the most horrifying, because the real story was never about superheroes. It was always about control. Most people imagine Compound V like a comic book origin story. One injection, one superpower, one lucky person becoming extraordinary. The reality is far messier. Compound V doesn't simply unlock hidden ability. It completely rewrites the human body. Muscle tissue changes, bones strengthen, the nervous system adapts, cells mutate. The brain itself develops differently. Once the process begins, there's no reversing it. Who you were before the injection is gone forever. The frightening part is that nobody, not even Vought, can perfectly predict what happens next. One child develops incredible strength. Another gains the ability to manipulate electricity. Someone else shrinks to the size of an insect. Others develop powers so bizarre they can barely function in everyday life. There was never a guarantee, only probabilities. That's the first myth Vought successfully sold to the public. They wanted everyone to believe superheroes were carefully engineered masterpieces. In reality, they were buying lottery tickets. Inject enough children. Eventually you'll create a Homelander. Eventually you'll create a Queen Maeve. Eventually you'll create an A-Train. The thousands of disappointing outcomes. Nobody sees those. They don't appear in commercials. They don't star in movies. They quietly disappear. Because failure isn't profitable. Success is, and that tells you almost everything you need to know about Vought. People often describe Vought as a pharmaceutical company. That's only partly true. It's actually much closer to a Hollywood studio. Everything revolves around image, the costumes, the interviews, the carefully scripted rescues, the social media campaigns, the blockbuster films. Even the Seven functions more like celebrities than superheroes. Vought doesn't simply sell powers. It sells belief. It convinces the public these people are destined to protect humanity, chosen by fate, born special. But underneath all the marketing cites a truth that would destroy the entire company if it ever became common knowledge. Almost none of these heroes chose this life. Think about that. Homelander never volunteered. Neither did Starlight. Neither did Queen Maeve, or The Deep, or Black Noir, or A-Train. Their futures were decided before they could even form memories. Most of them received Compound V as infants. Not because they were sick, not because they needed treatment, because adults decided extraordinary children would eventually become valuable assets. Sometimes those adults were desperate parents chasing money. Sometimes they genuinely believed they were giving their child a better future. Vought never cared which motivation brought them through the door, as long as another baby received another injection. Imagine discovering your entire identity was chosen before you could walk. Your career, your abilities, your fame, your future. Every major decision had already been made. That's the reality almost every Supe lives with. Once you recognize that, the show changes. Characters who once looked privileged suddenly become tragic. Take Starlight. For years, she believed becoming a superhero was her destiny. Her mother reinforced that belief every day. She trained, she sacrificed, she dedicated her life to becoming worthy of the gift she'd supposedly been given. Then everything collapsed. She learned she was never chosen. She was manufactured. Her powers weren't fate. They were the result of a decision someone else made when she was too young to understand what an injection even was. Suddenly, every childhood memory feels different. Was being a superhero ever really her dream? Or was it simply the only future she'd been allowed to imagine? That's a disturbing question, and it isn't unique to Starlight. It's true for almost everyone wearing a cape. That's why Vought guarded the secret of Compound V so fiercely. The serum wasn't merely valuable. It was the foundation supporting the greatest marketing campaign in history. The moment people realize superheroes aren't miracles, they become products, and products can be copied, improved, replaced. That's a disaster for a corporation whose entire business depends on convincing the world its heroes are one of a kind. But even that isn't the darkest consequence of Compound V. The real nightmare begins when Vought decides creating superheroes isn't enough. It wants to create the perfect superhero, and that's where Homelander enters the story. If Compound V created superheroes, then Homelander is the ultimate proof that the experiment failed. On paper, he's exactly what Vought wanted. The strongest Supe ever created, nearly indestructible, fast enough to cross cities in moments, powerful enough that almost nobody on Earth can challenge him. He's the face of the company, the symbol of American heroism, the crown jewel of Vought International. So why is he also the company's biggest nightmare? Because Vought spent decades perfecting his body, and almost no time developing the person inside it. Homelander didn't grow up with parents. He didn't have birthday parties. He didn't scrape his knees playing outside. He didn't learn empathy from a family that loved him. He learned everything inside laboratories. Scientists watched him through reinforced glass. They measured his strength, his reaction time, his tolerance for pain, his emotional responses. Everything about him was treated like data. And that's the tragedy at the center of his character. Vought figured out how to manufacture a god. They never figured out how to raise one. When people describe Homelander as evil, they're not wrong. But they often ignore something equally important. Nobody becomes emotionally healthy after growing up the way he did. Every relationship in his life was transactional. Every compliment had an agenda. Every adult around him wanted something. Control, information, results. Nobody simply loved him because he was a child. That leaves scars no amount of power can erase. Watch Homelander carefully throughout the series. For someone who claims to be above humanity, he spends an incredible amount of time begging humanity to love him. He obsessively watches approval ratings. He craves applause. He constantly seeks validation from strangers. The strongest man alive is also one of the most emotionally insecure. That isn't an accident. It's exactly what Vought created. His powers make him terrifying. His loneliness makes him dangerous. Because people who desperately need validation eventually start demanding. And when someone powerful begins demanding love instead of earning it, everyone else pays the price. What's fascinating is that Homelander isn't unique. He's simply the most extreme example. Look at Queen Maeve. When we first meet her, she seems cynical, detached, almost apathetic. But underneath that exterior is someone who spent years watching innocent people die while pretending everything is fine. She drinks because it's easier than confronting what she's become. Not because she's weak, because surviving inside Vought requires shutting off part of your conscience. The Deep suffers in a completely different way. His abilities make him look extraordinary, but they're also the source of endless humiliation. He's mocked by teammates, manipulated by executives, used whenever convenient, discarded whenever he becomes an embarrassment. For all his arrogance, he's constantly searching for acceptance from people who have never respected him. Then there's A-Train. On the surface, he's living the dream. Famous, rich, one of the fastest people alive. But strip away the marketing, and he's terrified. Because speed isn't just his power. It's his identity. The second someone faster comes along, who is he? That fear drives almost every terrible decision he makes. He abuses Compound V to stay competitive. He destroys his own heart chasing records. He sacrifices friendships. He compromises every principle he once had. Not because he enjoys becoming a worse person, because Vought created a system where slowing down means becoming irrelevant. And irrelevance is something A-Train fears almost as much as death. Black Noir represents another kind of damage. Without saying much at all, the series quietly reveals how much of his humanity has been stripped away. He's loyal because he was conditioned to be loyal. Obedient because obedience became survival. Even someone as intimidating as Black Noir is ultimately another victim of the same machine. Different personalities, different powers, different coping mechanism, but the same origin. Compound V changed their bodies. Vought shaped everything that came afterward. That's why calling Compound V a miracle drug completely misses the point. A miracle improves lives. Compound V complicates them. For every incredible ability it grants, it creates another burden. Strength without peace, fame without privacy, power without freedom. Every Supe gains something extraordinary. Every Supe loses something too. Then Season 3 introduces another piece of the puzzle. Temporary Compound V. For the first time, ordinary adults experience what it's like to become superhuman. Billy Butcher becomes nearly unstoppable. Super strength, heat vision, durability. For a brief moment, he can stand toe-to-toe with Homelander. It feels like the breakthrough Vought always promised, until the side effects appear. Every injection damages his brain. Every dose moves him closer to death. The power is real, so is the cost. That's one of the smartest reveals in the entire series. For years, Vought marketed Compound V as the greatest scientific achievement in history. But underneath the advertising, it's still unstable, still dangerous, still unpredictable. It never stopped being an experiment. The company simply became better at hiding the casualties. A-Train unknowingly proves the same point. Even after surviving childhood injections, his body eventually begins breaking down, not because his powers fail, because he pushed them beyond their limits. His failing heart becomes a reminder that Compound V always demands payment. Nobody escapes the bill forever. Not Butcher, not A-Train, not even Homelander, because despite everything his powers allow him to do, he remains imprisoned by the one thing Compound V could never fix, the desperate need to be loved. And that's where the story becomes much bigger than one superhero, because once a substance capable of creating gods exists, there's no chance the rest of the world simply ignores it. The moment Compound V exists, the world changes forever. Forget superheroes for a second. Think like a world leader. Imagine another country develops a chemical that can create people strong enough to destroy tanks with their bare hands. People who can fly, read minds, move faster than bullets. Would you sit back and hope they use that technology responsibly? Of course not. You'd try to steal it, recreate it, improve it. Because the first nation to build an army of superhumans would instantly change the balance of global power. That's exactly why Compound V is so terrifying. It isn't just a pharmaceutical breakthrough. It's the equivalent of inventing nuclear weapons. Once it exists, everyone wants it. The show hints at this throughout multiple seasons. The Soviets experimented with Soldier Boy. Foreign governments search for samples. Terrorist groups eventually gain access to Compound V. One secret formula slowly becomes an international arms race. And that's the one consequence Vought could never control. They thought they owned the future. Instead, they accidentally started a competition the entire world would eventually join. Ironically, that's how almost every revolutionary technology works. The people who invent it imagine all the ways they'll benefit. They rarely imagine what happens once everyone else gets their hands on it. Compound V was no different. The company believed it was creating superheroes. In reality, it was creating a new species of warfare. But perhaps the most disturbing part isn't the science. It's the business model built around it. Vought never wanted superheroes to save the world. It wanted them to sell it. Movies, television shows, energy drinks, theme parks, toy lines, political campaigns, military contracts, insurance deals. Everything became another revenue stream. Saving people almost felt secondary. If rescuing civilians improved the brand, great. If covering up a disaster protected profits, that worked too. The mission was never justice. It was growth. That's why Vought behaves so differently from the organizations you'd expect. When a Supe loses control, they don't ask how to prevent it from happening again. They ask how to spin it. When innocent people die, they don't investigate the truth. They workshop press releases. Whenever the image and morality collide, image wins every single time, because that's what corporations are designed to protect. Not ideals, brands. The most chilling realization is that Vought doesn't actually need evil people to accomplish any of this. It simply needs ordinary people willing to prioritize careers over conscience. Scientists who convince themselves they're helping humanity. Executives focused on quarterly profits. Politicians chasing campaign donations. Parents hoping their child becomes famous. Each person justifies one small decision. No single choice feels monstrous. But together, those decisions create Homelander. That's what makes Vought so much scarier than a traditional villain. You can't defeat it by punching the CEO. The system simply replaces whoever leaves. The machine keeps running, because the real product was never Compound V. The real product was dependency. Every Supe owes their identity to Vought, their costumes, their public image, their careers, their fame. Even their origin stories belong to the company. Imagine discovering that your entire life is intellectual property owned by someone else. That's the reality most superheroes live with. Some rebel against it, like Starlight. Some surrender to it, like the Deep. Some try to change it from within, like Queen Maeve. Others embrace it completely, like Homelander. Different choices, the same cage. That's why one of the biggest themes in The Boys isn't power, it's freedom. Because despite being the strongest people on Earth, very few Supes are actually free. They're trapped by contracts, public expectations, corporate manipulation, past trauma, or their own insecurities. Compound V gave them abilities. It never gave them control over their own lives. And maybe that's the cruelest irony in the entire series. The substance that promises unlimited power creates people who spend their lives controlled by someone else. That's why I don't think Compound V is the true villain of The Boys. It's just a chemical. Chemicals don't make moral decisions. People do. Vought chose to inject children. Vought chose to hide the truth. Vought chose profits over ethics. Vought chose to build an empire on human experimentation. Compound V was simply the tool. Human ambition turned it into a nightmare. And that's why the story still feels believable, despite the superheroes. Strip away the laser eyes, the flying, the impossible strength. What's left is a corporation convincing itself that the ends justify the means. History is full of companies and governments that believed exactly the same thing. That's what makes The Boys so effective. It isn't really asking whether superheroes would save the world. It's asking what corporations would do if they could manufacture. And judging by everything we've seen, the answer isn't very encouraging. So when people ask what the darkest thing in The Boys really is, I don't think it's Homelander or Soldier Boy or any individual Supe. It's the idea that an entire generation of children had their futures rewritten before they could ever choose them for themselves. Because once you understand that, you realize the powers were never the real story. The real story was ownership. Who owns the heroes, who profits from them, and who gets to decide what their lives become. That's the dark truth about Compound V. So what do you think? If Compound V existed in the real world, would any government or company be able to use it responsibly? Or would history repeat itself exactly the way it did in The Boys? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy deep dives into The Boys, hidden details, character psychology, and the darker themes hiding beneath the action, make sure you subscribe, because sometimes the most dangerous superpower isn't laser vision, it's giving the wrong people control.